A four-star Utah commit just flipped to BYU. What does it mean? And why have several players signed with Utah in this transfer portal cycle and then gone on to play somewhere else? It's very strange, and we're talking about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are available wherever you get your podcasts as well as on YouTube. Thank you for making us your first view and show of the day. If you're in the market for a second listen, make sure you check out Locked On College Football or Locked On Big 12. We are available wherever you get your podcasts as well as on YouTube. You can find us on social media at X as well. On X at Locked On Utes. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some players who committed to Utah and then now have decided to go play football somewhere else, just in this singular transfer portal cycle. That's right. We're not going to be talking about guys from the 23 or 24 cycle, or 24 transfers, but not 24 commits, like 24 guys who said just like days ago, I'm going to play for Utah in the fall, and then are just now deciding to switch somewhere else. It is a wild saga. And close with some thoughts on this college football weekend, because I do believe there is a narrative that's being some are trying to create a narrative that could down the road negatively impact Utah if it was to exist. But first, have to start with some massive news over the weekend. And I do want to talk about Utah landing the top running back in the transfer portal, Wayshawn Parker, coming up here soon on tomorrow's show. We're going to cover that. But this is something that just happened just yesterday. And I felt like it was really timely and worth talking about. And that's the fact that a four-star defensive end who was committed to Utah from the 2022 recruiting class, who served his mission during 23 and 24 and was coming back and was going to play at Utah in 25. Not anymore. He flipped, and not just any school, our rivals, the BYU Cougars. So yeah, I'm talking about Hunter Clegg, who went to American Fork High School. The 6'4", 235-pound pass rusher was part of that big group of four-star, and just part of that monster class that Utah landed when they got the likes of Spencer Fano, when they got Smith Snowden, and Hunter Clegg was part of that. Yes, he went on to serve his mission first, but it felt like he was going to be a guy who was going to come in and one day be an elite pass rusher and potentially the mayor of Sac Lake City. He's a guy who was incredibly productive. He had 61 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, and 8 sacks back in his final year in 2022. And it's a big loss. So we'll talk about why Clegg didn't come to Utah first. But in first, just talking about like what it means for Utah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, we've talked before about Utah losing recruits to the SEC and the Big Ten, but whenever you're losing a recruit like Utah did with Carson Ryan a few weeks ago, to not just someone in your conference, but your rival, your in-state rival, that hurts. If you want to be the best football program in the state, you have to recruit the best and bring in the best guys, and that's where it hurts to lose a guy like Clegg, who I do believe had the potential, who has the potential and ceiling to be one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12. I don't know if he's going to be like a Spencer Fano type where he's one of the best at his position, not just in the Big 12, but generally one of the best at his position. But I do believe this is a guy who has the potential to be a dang good pass rusher. And he was someone who I got to call and cover a few of his games back in the high school level. And he's a special player. We talked about the stats and the numbers, but his ability and the way teams always try to double team him, his speed, his strength, his athleticism, he earned that 4-star ranking. And in an era where it's hard to get 4 stars because of NIL, that it sucks not to have that guy coming up, but it sucks even more to see him go to BYU, obviously. And speaking on why he went to BYU, Mitch Harper, who is with KSL Sports, does a good job covering the Cougars. This was a direct quote he had. He actually spoke to Clegg in an article available on KSL Sports, and this is what he said. When talking to Clegg, Clegg said this to Harper in the article. BYU isn't the same as when I left my mission. The coaches are as good and committed as anyone. The scheme has changed. The strength program is elite now. The nutrition has changed. BYU football is ready to put in as much work as it takes to become the best team possible and compete. Some of those statements in there, I think, are really unfortunate for Utah in terms of BYU isn't the same as when I left for my mission. When I say it's unfortunate for Utah, it just does go to show you how much stronger the Cougars football program has become. Utah was the best football program in the state in a while. I think with the year that BYU had last year, coupled with the year that Utah had, like right now, the best football program in the state of Utah, it probably is BYU. And that hurts to say. And I do think Utah has a great chance to beat BYU this year, finish the year higher ranked than BYU, then come back. But it's hard to say it's not BYU when Utah lost 7 of their final 8 games. BYU finished in the top 20. BYU had a 10-win season. It's hard, and especially if they go and beat Colorado in the bowl games, and they have a chance to. Utah didn't even get bowl eligible. And then the whole just coaching uncertainty, the way the Cam Rising thing had been handled, and you get a little bit of like, okay, what's going on behind the scenes? BYU doesn't have that right now, and he credits the defense change. This has been a big thing, right? Ever since BYU's brought in Jay Hill, things have changed for the Cougars. They've become a stronger program, and I've always thought Kalani Sitake was a great head coach, and he's done a really good job too. But you see things like the scheme has changed. Like that's a big thing, right? That's what Clegg is talking about. Strength program is now elite, and the nutrition has changed. Clegg, when he was going through his process, did not believe that BYU was, and it wasn't back then when he committed. I don't even know if BYU was in the Big 12. That's how crazy all of this has gotten. Maybe they were by then. It was a couple of years ago. But look, BYU has stepped up in a lot of ways, and players like Hunter Clegg have noticed. This is, to me, sounds like a guy who maybe even back, I don't know Hunter Clegg, but when you read this, you're like, okay, did he always want to go to BYU? Was he always a BYU fan? I mean, he was just an American Fork, so not far at all from Provo, obviously, not too far from Salt Lake City either. But either way, he feels like BYU is the best option for him right now, and that's where it hurts. And it's another reminder that, like, hey, right now, the Cougars have the best football program in the state of Utah. It doesn't mean that Utah can't bounce back next year. And yes, obviously the year before BYU was down, but so was Utah for their standards, still finished the year with 4 losses. Yes, backup quarterbacks and all the things of that nature. And I do believe Utah can bounce back and reclaim their spot as the top of the conference. But when you have not just a recruit choosing, but then you have a guy like Carson Ryan. We talked about this before on the show. Carson Ryan was going to be this team's number 1 tight end probably. And I like Landon King a lot. I think that was a 1A, 1B type thing. That's why I wasn't massively sweating the loss of Carson Ryan. But it still hurts to see a guy you project to be a starting tight end go to your direct rival in the same state. That's never ideal. And it's unfortunate for Utah that they're in this spot now where BYU just landed a major commitment from a guy who's going to come to Utah. It's kind of another tip in the cap of the Cougars of like, hey, we're the best football program in the state right now. And as much as I want to argue with that, it's kind of hard to. So I believe in this Utah team. I think they can. And honestly, if you made me say like which team will finish higher next year, I probably would say Utah. But as for right now, we're not projecting. We're into like, what is it right now? Who's the better team at this moment? Probably is BYU. And that hurts. And this is another example of that. So really interested to see what Utah continues to do in the transfer portal. And one thing that's obviously hurt Utah in the portal is that they had some players they landed that they got really excited about. And then all of a sudden those players just decided to leave and go elsewhere. College football is crazy right now. We're going to talk about what is going on with Utah and what just happened with these recruits that they were able to land that are now all of a sudden leaving. We're going to be talking about what has changed in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? They definitely helped me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users. That's right, over 5 million users, and has a total of 500 million in canceled subscription savings, saving members up to $740 a year while using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with the goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. rocketmoney.com/locked-on to start saving with Rocket Money today. All right, keeping this one going. As we said, Utah lost out on Hunter Clegg. That's a tough blow when you have a 4-star committed to you who's going to flip and choose your rival, and speaks to kind of the current state of some of things going on at Utah, as well as the more threat that BYU has emerged as in just the Big 12 itself. But unfortunately, the losses didn't stop there for Utah this weekend. They lost 2 key players. The first one is one I feels like I think literally my last show, I was talking about how excited I was that Joseph Williams, the Tulsa receiver, was going to be committing to Utah. And then he's now at Colorado, and that really hurts. And as I mentioned, we're going to get to Wayshawn Parker on tomorrow's show, but just in the era of the transfer portal, there's even more news that's broken since Parker committed. And one of those is you lose out on an elite receiver, or a guy with, I shouldn't say elite receiver because he hasn't shown that yet, but Williams, a guy who had potential to be an elite receiver. It's just a true freshman with the Tulsa Golden Hurricanes last year. 4 of his last 5 games, he had over 100 yards. So that was a guy who kind of started slowly but surely kind of worked his way up too. And was a guy I felt like had wide receiver 1 potential with Utah, 6'2", 195, just a freshman. So and you always see a massive growth from freshman to sophomore years, at least in the most part you do. I think Spencer Fano year 1 to year 2. But Williams guy had 30 receptions, 580 yards, 5 touchdowns, 19 yards per catch. I was excited to see what he was going to do with Devin Dampier airing it out to him. And we don't get to see that because Williams is now headed to Colorado, unfortunately. And it's just really tough. And it's hard. I do understand, though. I just wish he didn't commit to Utah. I mean, with what the Buffs did passing-wise last year as a receiver, those of you listening to this, just like put yourself in Williams' shoes. If you were going to say, hey, would you rather be a receiver at Utah or Colorado? That's not really a hard decision. Even if we maybe don't know who the Buffs quarterback room is going to be next year because Shedur's moving on, we just know that they have a propensity to air it out more. And if you look at Utah's history, they haven't had a receiver go over 1,000 yards in a very long time. I think Dalton Kincaid might have done it, but that's not a receiver. That's a tight end. So that's where it's just, I understand the departure. What hurts is committing to Utah and then going elsewhere. Well, I want to touch on that in a moment, but unfortunately, Williams wasn't the only player that Utah lost. They also lost Mike Washington, the running back who came over from New Mexico State, had 157 carries last year, 725 yards, 8 touchdowns, averaged 4 yards per carry. He's going to be a senior this coming year. The 6'2", 215-pound back is now headed to Arkansas. Weirdly enough, not the first running back that Utah's lost to Arkansas, although obviously William Washington never played a snap as Jaquindon Jackson went from Utah over to the Razorbacks, and now you see that with Washington. So with Washington, honestly, this might be one where he felt like, hey, Wayshawn Parker is coming over. Utah's running back coach was, of course, Parker's coach before then. Utah also has added some other quality backs already in the transfer portal too. So maybe this was a situation where he felt like, okay, I'm going to have to either, I don't really want to try and compete for carries, or maybe not compete's not the right word, but I didn't feel like I was going to get as many carries, or just the odds of me getting that weren't as likely. So that's why I decided to head to Arkansas. We don't know all the issues. And in general, maybe it's just like, hey, Arkansas's in the SEC and you're in the Big 12. And I can't fault him for that if that is the reason he did it. But still, unfortunately, anytime you see a player decommit, Utah did act very quickly, and they already added another running back. I mean, they just added another guy in Daniel Bray or Devin Green is the newest guy that they were able to add to go along with Rogers and Parker. And we'll talk about Rogers' addition and just in general what this running back room is going to look like for Utah next year on tomorrow's show. We'll be leading with Parker unless something crazy news-wise breaks. So just another disappointment where, hey, signed to be with Utah, and I think Utah's backfield will be okay. I think the Williams loss is a bigger loss when you look at Utah's personnel, right? Darren Zipper and Zacharias Williams showed a couple nice flashes of freshmen, but nowhere near enough to be like, those are our top 2 receivers next year. You need to be better there if you're Utah. Versus Washington, it's like, okay, you just landed the top back in the transfer portal in Parker, so this departure hurts, but not as much because we also have other proven players in the running back room. We do not have proven players in the wide receiver room, even though you did just land the guy from Mississippi State a few weeks ago too. But the biggest thing with both these things, and we want to get to, is just the continued problem we have in college athletics, which is just the insanity that is the transfer portal right now. The fact that players I don't have issues with guys transferring. But when you're telling me a guy can commit to a school, I think I read somewhere that like Williams signed with Utah and then still had a Colorado visit set up, and same thing with Washington, obviously, whatever happened there. Like, why are these guys committing to Utah, saying they're going to go here, and then all of a sudden you leave? Like, I understand players commit and then spend a year somewhere, and it's like, this isn't for me, I'm going to go somewhere else. Like, we've accepted that's the new norm in college football. But to see players sign with Utah for the 2025 season and not even make it 5 days and then transfer. That's really is just wild. And it shows you how out of control everything is kind of right now in this sport. And I don't really know the answer. And I think this is going to continue to happen to Utah, right? I mean, just last week, we saw Cameron Calhoun commit to being with Utah. He said he was recruiting other players on social media to come to Utah. Then a few days after that, all of a sudden he's in the portal. Now he's going to be starting in Alabama. Like this is just what happens. I mean, it's the new norm, and it doesn't just apply to players who like were in the portal, then come to your team, and then now they get a better offer. Now it applies to on your team and it doesn't just apply to on your team and then you get a better offer and leave. It obviously applies to guys who are like content to stay on your team, say, oh, I'm going to stay. And then all of a sudden they come out of nowhere. So no player is safe at any time. We knew that, but this is another example. I mean, we're talking about players that these teams had a shot at. And it's the same thing of like a coaching pecking order, right? Or just in any kind of job board you're filling out and hiring. Maybe at the time they're like, oh, like Colorado's example, maybe they're like at the time, like, okay, we'd rather have this receiver than Williams. Well, this receiver committed elsewhere. So now let's set our sight on Williams. Oh, he already committed to Utah. That's not a problem. We're still going to be able to get him to come to Colorado. That's the kind of stuff that happens in college football right now, and it's impacting Utah too, unfortunately. So tough to see more players leave after committing to Utah, and 2 players I was excited about to see. I do think Washington Jr. would have committed, been the second or third back in Utah's backfield. And Utah lost the player that was most likely to be wide receiver 1 for them in Williams, a spot we thought was filled last week. And now just 1 weekend later, things have already changed. Nothing is certain in this transfer portal era right now, and it makes it wild to cover. So, yeah, 2 losses for Utah. The Williams loss bigger than the Washington one, so we'll see what Utah continues to do. They already have offers out for other receivers. Utah did that quickly and added another running back already, so I like that the coaches are being proactive in this just chaotic situation that continues to be the 2024 transfer portal leading to the 2025 regular season. So we'll continue to monitor the portal and everything there and the players that Utah adds, and including, as just said, tomorrow's show, definitely want to talk about Wayshawn Parker is going to add to Utah because I do think he's going to be a game changer for this run game, especially with Spencer Fontenot and Caleb Lomu leading the charge. But there is one thing I want to talk about with the college football playoff results this weekend, and I do think relates to Utah. I'm going to give you my take on that in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So that's one nice thing about FanDuel, too, is you have so many ways to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. With FanDuel, you can look at the spread, money line, of course. And we talked about those player touchdowns to individuals. So you have all your options covered, whether it is the NFL playoff race, college football playoffs. We have the second round of matchups is set. How are those going to shake out? NBA, NHL, college basketball. It's all there for you at FanDuel today. As a Minnesota Vikings fan, they got a big win this weekend. I'm looking at them against the Green Bay Packers. Excited to see how they'll shake out. Also, bowl season. We got a couple fun bowl games coming up this Christmas week before we get the best games once again the following next week, a little over a week away from those. But if you want to get on any of the action, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. We had some very interesting and wild results in the college football playoff this past weekend. And this very much so relates to Utah for those of you that might be saying, how does this have anything to do with Utah? So talk about first year of the 12-team format, and you win your conference. You'll have a chance, if you're one of the top 4 highest seeds, to get a first-round bye and move on. Or if you could be like Clemson, where then you don't get to be one of the 4 highest seeds, and then you have to go on the road, which is a tough thing to shake out too, of course. But anyway, so we had several teams go on the road, and some of those teams were the most questioned and debatable if they should have gotten in. Indiana got beat pretty good by Notre Dame. 27-17, the final score wasn't really that close, but give the Hoosiers credit for making it close late. Then Penn State absolutely throttled SMU 38-10. Then you get Clemson, who actually I felt like played Texas the closest of any of the games we had, but still ended up losing 38-24. And then Tennessee got absolutely boat raced by Ohio State, 42-17. So now, and especially before the Tennessee-Ohio State game, right, we see a very interesting narrative and discussion of Tennessee and Indiana didn't deserve to be in the field. Imagine if that was Utah and you have a SMU team that finished the season, regular season, with just one loss, and then was at BYU. So a really good, I believe it was at BYU, so a top 20 team in the country. You have one loss there, and then you lose a narrow conference championship on a wild game, and they want to take you out. And then Indiana, an 11-1 regular season team, and they're like, who'd you play? You didn't beat anyone, and they want to take you out. For SEC teams with extremely flawed resumes, I think that's very dangerous. If that's what many members of the media and certain fans I saw kind of trying to perpetuate. Now, thankfully, what happened later that night, too, is the truth also came out in terms of how hard it is to win on the road when the best teams in the country are playing at home in a must-win game off a bye. Because Tennessee, a team no one was questioning if they should be in, got decimated, 42-17. In my opinion, too, and I would say Ohio State, maybe them and Texas, right? But I would personally say Ohio State's better than Texas right now. That's an opinion. You could say Ohio State is the best team, and that's why, even though people will argue Tennessee was the best team of the lower seeds that had to go on the road, that's why, that's why they were able to play Ohio State close early, and they still proved they belonged to be there. But they really weren't playing Ohio State that close. And I just believe in general, it's more so not that these teams didn't belong. It's just how hard it is to win on the road in college football when these teams have a bye to prepare for and a must-win game. Tennessee got blown out more than pretty much any of the games, in my opinion. And some of you may be pushing back on that. But Indiana had so many opportunities to make plays in the Notre Dame game and win that game, right? Like the interception in the end zone by Rourke, the long touchdown run they allowed in the SMU game. The SMU defense was holding Penn State's offense in check. What was the problem? 2 pick sixes from the quarterback. How about, and then we mentioned Clemson. The offense, Klubnik, they scored right away. How about the Tennessee game? Nope, they were going to go down 28-0 if it was not for a miracle interception. So this narrative that's trying to get started, that's going to look to keep the likes of Utah and other just one-loss non-conference champions out of the playoff, it's just false, because we see it's just genuinely the takeaway from this weekend should be how hard it is to win on the road in college football. Not these teams didn't deserve it, because then based on that logic, Tennessee didn't deserve to be there. Once again, I think if you watch the games, Tennessee looked like they were the team who played the worst in terms of what they did against Ohio State. They were, for what I saw, they weren't even close to competing with the Buckeyes for the majority of that game until a miracle interception versus SMU and Indiana. I look at that they had tangible, real things they easily could have corrected and fixed, and then they were right in there. Tennessee's offense had no answers. Tennessee's defense had no answers. And I know that game was a little closer at the halftime, but obviously didn't end up being close. As we had starters for Ohio State's offense and defense with 9 minutes in the fourth quarter on the sideline. The truth is it's hard to sit out. You cannot take away what teams earned. SMU and Indiana earned the right to be in the college football playoff. Bama and Ole Miss absolutely did not. And I really hope that we don't see next year these teams try to be remember what happened last year with SMU and Indiana who didn't deserve to be in. We put them in, they got blown out. But then you have to say after, remember what happened with Tennessee when they went on the road. And we were reminded how hard it is to win on the road in college football, especially against the best teams. People love to clown all over Ryan Day, and I understand he's made some mistakes. And they have a weird Michigan thing, but that Michigan thing was more so a perfect matchup, I'd argue, too, just with what Mason Graham did on the interior to a banged-up interior offensive line. It's so much more just these teams don't lose at home, and it's really hard to play on the road in college football in a must-win game against a top team in the country. And we saw it this weekend. So I just really want, especially if Utah's in this spot in the future and moving forward, I want Utah to be allowed in because they've earned the right to be in. I don't think the gaps between these conferences is that crazy as much as they try to tell us, right? Too, because Arkansas beat Tennessee. Who did Arkansas lose to? At Oklahoma State. What? We don't talk about that. Arizona State has an SEC win this year. Mississippi State. And people might say, well, that's because the bottom of the SEC is not very good. Yeah, but then those same people will argue, okay, Ole Miss should have been in when Ole Miss lost to a bottom SEC team in Kentucky. Bama lost to Vandy, and then Bama, of course, also lost to a very bad Oklahoma team. Notre Dame looked awesome this weekend. They lost to NIU. at the end of the day, to me, when you look at these games, and I hope, once again, if Utah's in this position, it has to apply. These teams earned the right to get in and be there. What this weekend taught us is how hard it is to win on the road in college football. Hence why the SEC team got blown out too. So I hope moving forward that we still allow the likes of Indiana and SMU to get in because they've earned the right to be in. And we saw in these games just how hard it is to win on the road in college football too. So I really hope that the little guys don't get squeezed out of this even more as much as everyone is trying to. So that's my rant to end the show. Let me know your guys' thoughts on Hunter Clegg flipping to BYU, on the guys who signed with Utah and now are going somewhere else, and of course on all the madness of the college football playoff. And how would you feel if it was Utah, like me, who would be incredibly fired up if people are calling SMU and Indiana frauds? I think that is ridiculous with the schedules and they played and the wins they have over good teams. And then just like an SEC team that we saw this weekend in Tennessee, I thought Tennessee was decent, but I didn't think they were as good as Ohio State. Ohio State's one of the best teams in the country. They just have a Michigan issue that they need to figure out, but they don't have to play Michigan. So we saw more than anything just how hard it is to win on the road in college football, not fraudulent teams to me. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes second listen. Make sure you check out Locked On Big 12. We've got a fun crossover coming up this week, a little holiday special too. So hope you all check that out and hope you all have a great Christmas week. Appreciate all of you continuing to tune in, and we're going to keep the content coming and rolling on Locked On Utes. We hope you'll join us tomorrow.